Christine Hamilton, why on earth would we give the World Health Organization any more power when they absolutely blew it over the course of this pandemic?
Absolutely no reason whatsoever. It's all part of Bill Gates' master plan to rule the world. And as you said, the WHO ignored the early warnings when the COVID pandemic was just beginning. They came from Taiwan. They completely ignored that. And then they praised the Chinese,
China,
I think you said, for transparency. When the Chinese were, I don't know what's happened to the whistleblower, probably still in prison. The Chinese were imprisoning people like that. And never forget that in 2014, when the Ebola outbreak was happening, the WHO resisted calls from the doctors who knew what they were doing, and they didn't want to offend any of their member governments, apparently. So their track record is absolutely abysmal. And no, certainly not. Why should we give any more power frankly, to China, never mind to Bill Gates? We did very well, thank you, ploughing our own canoe. That's a very bad metaphor, ploughing our own canoe during COVID. So I do not want the WHO, you know what I mean, interfering.
But Belinda, Lucy, why is no one even questioning this? No one's even talking about potentially giving the WHO these unprecedented powers.
Well, thank goodness for you, Dan, for starters, because this platform is incredible and very, very precious to the British public at the moment. You know, supranational governance that power grabs democratic agency from ordinary folk over their ordinary everyday lives, especially their bodily autonomy, is dangerous. And it is not a recipe for peace. You know, I banged this drum during the Brexit years as well because the EU kept power grabbing more and more. Because if you think this is the end of it, it's not. We have to draw a red line now, and Boris needs to be very clear about our negotiating position, because Bill Gates seems to have more of a god complex at the moment than like Bono and Tony Blair put together, and that whole, it's just terrifying. You know, when I see him on telly, my toes curl. I'm like, come out in a hot sweat because I don't trust them, and I don't feel like they mean well by the ordinary people. They're like those who wanted only those who went to university to have the vote. You know, they know better, and they're going to tell the little people how to run their lives. We have to say no and draw the line. We're a sovereign country. We've got to govern ourselves.
Benjamin Butterworth, do you have concerns about this World Health Organization pandemic accord?
I mean, the one thing that's clearly right is that they didn't stand up to China, and that's how it happened to spread so fast in the first place. The first doctor who talks about COVID isn't in prison, he's dead, because he died of COVID shortly afterwards. Now, look, I think that, countries like Britain, like the US, having more interest and more sway in the World Health Organization would be beneficial, because that would stop countries like China, which are abusive by nature, by their lack of democracy, from abusing an organization like the World Health Organization. And, you say that Bill Gates has a master plan to take over the world. I don't think he needs that. He's been pretty much the richest person for decades. He was advising about how to deal with pandemics 20 years ago.
What does he know about that?
Well, we know that he has a lot of insight to this stuff. He's doing huge help in Africa and third world countries. Well, you can look back to clips 15 years ago when he talked about why countries should be having funds like they do for nuclear powers and Trident for something like a pandemic, because it's far more likely to destroy the world. And that's what we saw in the last 3 years.
Do you agree with him that even people who've been quadruple jabbed are still going to have to be jabbed every 6 months, even if they've had COVID over that period? Do you agree with that?
I totally agree that people should be able to keep getting the COVID vaccines. Every year...
So you keep doing it every 6 months?
Well, it won't be possible, but if it were, I probably would consider it. As a 30-year-old, it's not particularly useful, but I think a lot of people...
So why do it?
Why bother?
Because...
What's it about? Is it about virtue signaling?
No, it's not. But as I was going to finish, people who are older or have a particular vulnerability, they are going to want to get this just like they get the flu vaccine. And who are you to say that people shouldn't be able to get their vaccines every 6 or 12 months?
We can decide that for ourselves. We don't need the WHO telling us that that's what we're going to do.
But what you do want is some of the world's best scientists getting together and making that advice. And that's why I think it's a good idea. And we shouldn't be afraid of the World Health Organization. They've had a lot of good advice.
They have, but why are they so opaque? They're so opaque. How did the Director General get his position? Because China pushed him into it.
Belinda, I think we should be very afraid of them, actually, and this soft power which they're using in all sorts of terrifying ways.
And also, is our Parliament really going to reject advice? Say it's just advice, for example, because these apparently are proposals and amendments rather than a new treaty. But I don't really trust our Parliament, having seen its history of being burned by the Lisbon Treaty and all sorts of things they sign in dark corridors. I don't really trust them not to outsource our sovereignty anymore, because they've done it before. So it's a question of whether we trust our parliaments to stop the WHO, forcing things upon us.
What I would like to see the WHO doing now is instituting an investigation into the Chinese virology.
Yeah, why aren't they doing that?
But they're barely talking about that, Christine. They're paying lip service to that. And by the way, I don't trust them for one moment, because any time they get into China, they don't do anything that the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want them to do.
But why does that not prove that countries like Britain should be getting more involved in WHO, should support things like
That's
that?
the same argument as-
We already fund it. I mean, the US is the biggest funder.
Yeah.
We're one of the biggest funders. It's made no difference. Personally, Benjamin, and this will make your skin crawl, I would say we should defund the WHO, just like we should defund the BBC, and then we would be in a much stronger position.
Look, the only thing I want my skin crawling with is the COVID vaccine.
Oh, no!
that's pathetic.
No, my
You don't
God.
believe in science, do you?
I do believe in science, and that's why we're all sat here not 2 metres apart, because the vaccine opened the world up, and Bill Gates was right.
Did the COVID vaccine stop transmission, Benjamin?
Well, we know it cuts transmission.
Did it stop transmission?
No, and no one ever claimed it did, but it
Yes,
does.
they-
It stops an awful lot of people dying or getting sick, and I think that's a pretty
I
good
mean, the
deal.
vast majority of people I know got Omicron within days of having the third jab.